Chuck, speaking of looking for answers, seemingly the answer to the conundrum around what do we do with South African referees, VAR. It's been mentioned quite a few times. The Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, Gayton McKenzie, he came out and he gave us the figures for what it's going to cost to get VAR. And he said that they're going to pay the deposit and they have sponsors on board and they've got SAFA as well who need to contribute, but they are going ahead with it. 80 million rand once off, 70,000 rand per game. It is still a good idea for us to get VAR after hearing the numbers.
So that would be like what, £4 million or something. That's exorbitant. That's crazy money, because there are teams who are struggling to play players, and we want to put in VAR, of which we have said VAR is a good system, but it depends in whose hands it's in. Because if you look at the contrasting leagues, EPL is struggling with it. This season, last season, there's always contention, whereas in the other leagues, they seem to be using it quite well. So you bring VAR and you give it to these guys who are not necessarily competent, and then we have more complaints. Then you're like, for maybe easy, like 100 million down the drain. Because then it's 70,000 again every other week. The thing that I always ask myself about these particular systems is it not a matter of just videos and aligning things and then just editing in terms of we're pausing the video here?
If it was that simple, Chuck would have VAR, right?
Yeah.
If it was that simple, we would have VAR. But it's not. It's a whole technological system. Remember, it's like Hawkeye. When Hawkeye was there in cricket in England, but then it wasn't anywhere else in the world, and then it showed up in Australia. And I was wondering, it's like, man, I watched this. Why don't we get it? It's like it's a technology where it is owned, the patent or the trademark or the actual technology is owned by a particular company, and you need to get it from them. It's not just a matter of the replays that we see, because you need to set up extra cameras at the particular stadiums in order to get a full picture, as you would, of what is actually happening with the decisions that you're making.
I still have those questions, Jay. I hear you, but I'm just thinking, is it a matter of copyright? Because, for instance, right, interesting fact, the speed gun was developed in South Africa. That's like laser technology. We can tell how fast a car is going by laser tech. If you use cameras, that is already existing knowledge that we have, and just the idea of VR and how it works, the cameras around to always get a 360 view of what's happening on the pitch. Do we need to get a particular technology from a particular company? Can't we do it ourselves? And the reason why I'm saying this, Jay, is because it's not guaranteed to work. And we're going to spend so much money on this thing, number one. Number two...
So, Saifun?
Man, I want it, but at the price, I mean, it's not top of my list of priorities when it comes to the PSL. If we could have stadiums filled like we did in Gqeberha every other week, and you're like, okay, clubs are making money. Let's have VAR. But with players not getting paid, Mamkize can't pay players because Agana Mal or Unai Asazi, and then there's bans. You're like, is this really like at the top of our priorities? Maybe it is when you're looking at contests like the MT8 final, right? When you're like, okay, these goals are contentious. You want a clear picture as the fan and as the competitors. But I wanted to myself, that amount of money versus the development of women's football, for instance, 80 million, that goes a long way in terms of a list of priorities, right? So it would help, but man, the figures is making me think twice. The numbers.
Chuck, I have been consistent about wanting VAR in our local football, because every single game week, there's a call or calls that are just like head scratches. And it's ruining our game. Like, it really is ruining our game, the level of officiating that we have. And it's not just in the PSL, right? The conversation, of course, shot up because of what happened in the MTN8 final, where everybody was watching. But this is true not only just in cup finals, it's true in PSL games. It's true in the level below the PSL, where, by the way, it's maybe not just a judgment in error, but there are things that are happening there where if you go to the grounds and you watch an NFT game, like, you'll come back with a report in terms of what is influencing the officiating over there, but also in the Hollywood-based Super League as well, right? So across the board. And this is the issue, that you're going to sort it out in the PSL, but then what about everything else, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe that's being greedy, where you want it everywhere. Because, for example, as much as they have VAR in England, they don't have it in the early parts of the Carabao Cup. They don't have it in the early parts of the FA Cup as well, because the grounds of those teams who play outside of the Premier League, they're not fitted with the cameras or the technology. The teams who played in the Premier League and then dropped down a division, they have access to it because that was granted to them when they came up to the Premier League. So as much as I make the complaint that it's not going to solve everything across the board, nowhere in the world, I'd venture to say, is that the case. We're down to the 17th tier. You've got VAR. So it should be focused on the Premier Division. And I would welcome it, except for the fact that I heard those figures and I was like, nah, man, that doesn't feel right. That feels, Chuck, like you living with your family, Queen, and we are Spana, and you get a Ferrari.
Yeah.
And you park it outside. It's like, what about everybody else? What about where you live? What about the roof over your head? Nah, that's not as important because, I'm a take sang I don't get to work on time, so I go get a Ferrari. You might need a car. It might be practical for you to get a car, and it might make life easier for you. But then when you look around, it's like, is this really where I want to direct my funds? Because the only other countries on the continent which do have VAR is Morocco, it's Libya, and Algeria. And I'll focus in on Morocco. In the case of Morocco, right? Morocco have a professional women's league.
Yeah.
Morocco built football facilities a few years ago, and the result of that, and in investing in development, because after making the 1998 World Cup, they didn't make the World Cup again, and they were yo-yoing with the AFCON as well, and they hadn't won it in a long time, and a decision was taken to refocus the investment into development. When that happened, as I'm saying, you have a women's professional league. You have on the women's side, they've won ASF Rabat have won the Women's Champions League. You had the Moroccan women's national team make it to the WAFCON final, and you had them qualify out of their group in the World Cup, and you had their men get to the semifinals of the recently completed FIFA World Cup, and you had the under 23s get to the final of the Olympics. So it feels as if they are adding on top of what is already a solid foundation that, okay, on top of taking care of the basics, let's then get VAR. Now they're about to host the World Cup with Spain as well as Portugal in 2030. So it feels as if, you can do that because we've taken care of basics. Whereas in South Africa, you mentioned, as recently as last December, Morocco Swallows players went on strike because they weren't getting paid. Every single season, there's a story of a team not paying their players. It was TS Galaxy the other season, Royal AM you mentioned, and we still do not have a fully professional women's league. So it feels as if you're gonna go take 80 million and throw it on technology and throw it on VAR and 70,000 rand every week, that if we can lobby sponsors to come into the game like that, maybe we should be doing that for the other clearing spots that definitely need investment, So professionalize the refs. Let's start there. Maybe that's a 20 million rand effort, and the 80 million rand that's left over. And I don't know if the sponsors would say, well, if it's not VAR, then we don't come on board. But I doubt. I feel like, as I'm saying, if you can lobby them to come into the game for this, you can lobby them to come into the game for all sorts of reasons, right? That then you take what is left over and we develop the game. We need VAR. We need better officiating. But I think much more of a priority, we need investing in our development as well as in our women's game.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if this is necessarily true, because if you think about what you just detailed there, practically it will start with professionalizing the officials and then making the leagues better and all these other things, and then put VAR on top, because it seems then for us to have jumped straight to VAR seems like a political thing, because it's Gaten McKenzie telling us this, right? The same Gaten McKenzie was taking pictures with the Freedom Cup, the Rugby Championship trophy with the Springboks. The same Gaten McKenzie was calming the crowds at Nelson Mandela Stadium. So you wonder that why do we go all the way to VAR? I know fans are talking about it, but there are other steps that we need to take as a country, as a league, as a footballing federation, in terms of here's how we improve football first. And then maybe with the issue of officiating, here's how we professionalize it, here's how we train them, here's what we expect from them. Because what we see in England, right, because that's the most publicized league, if you're not performing well, you probably get to officiate in the championship because you didn't cut it at that particular level. But if the people taking brown envelopes or being influenced further down, there's no relegation for performance. It's like, hey, Abongile Tom, come back again, because who else do we have but you, So those kind of issues need to be sorted out first, then get on the technology. Get the people right first, then get on the tech. If you give them the check, it's the Ferrari in the shack. At some point, someone's gonna say, "I think you fight 87 Le Ferrari," and you're like, "No, that's not how it works." Let me give it some stance. Like, no, that's not how it works, because then you'd have a Ferrari in the poor hands. So I think it makes sense to start with the professionalizing of the officials. Fix our football first, then VAR.
Yeah, Chuck, for me, it was the money. Like,
Yeah.
as I'm saying, like, I welcome VAR because I do think technology does help officiating. And we have better officiating, so VAR would help, or you think it would help. It has helped in England. It's not the greatest use of it because, again, it's the humans behind it. And I think we'd be faced with the same problems, right? But I think we'd have better outcomes than what we have now. And as I'm saying, I've been calling for it for a long time. I did not know how much it cost, though. Now that I know, I feel like we can use that money better somewhere else.